It was early spring in a small town nestled between rolling green hills and quiet streams, the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names and secrets never stayed buried for long. In the outskirts of that town lived Daniel Miller, a 48-year-old farmer whose hands bore the marks of decades of hard work and whose heart still carried the weight of a loss he rarely spoke of. He lived alone on the land his father once tilled, a modest stretch of acres dotted with oak trees, cornfields, and one enormous boulder that had sat stubbornly in the middle of his property for as long as anyone could remember. That boulder had become somewhat of a joke among the locals. Children whispered that it hid a monster underneath, and the older folks said it was cursed, that Daniel's father had tried to break it once and stopped after hearing strange noises echoing from inside. Daniel never paid much attention to the stories. To him, it was just a big rock, inconvenient but harmless. Still, every time he looked at it, especially at the small tree growing straight out of its crack, he felt something peculiar, a mix of curiosity and unease, like the land was keeping a secret from him. One cloudy morning, Daniel's tractor got stuck near the boulder after a heavy rain. Frustrated, he kicked the tire, muttering to himself. That's when his neighbor Clara Jennings, a retired teacher in her 60s, appeared by the fence, holding her usual thermos of coffee and a smile that could brighten even the dullest day. "Still fighting that rock, Danny?" she teased. He chuckled. "No, ma'am, but it sure feels like it's fighting me back." Clara glanced at the boulder, her expression softening. "Your daddy used to say that tree growing through stone was proof that life finds a way. Maybe it's there for a reason." But Daniel wasn't in the mood for riddles. He had been struggling financially since the drought last year, and every obstacle on the farm seemed heavier than before. That afternoon, after finishing his chores, he stood in front of the boulder with a sledgehammer resting on his shoulder. The tree, now taller and stronger than ever, swayed gently in the wind, its roots disappearing deep into the stone. "Let's see what you're hiding," he whispered. He struck once. The sound echoed across the valley, sharp and metallic. He struck again, and this time, something strange happened. The ground beneath his boots trembled lightly, almost like the earth itself was breathing. Daniel paused, frowning, his heart pounding faster. He took a few steps back, unsure whether to continue, but curiosity, that old whisper that had followed him since childhood, pushed him forward. He swung again, harder. The crack widened, and from within, a faint shimmer caught his eye. He dropped the hammer and crouched down, brushing away dirt and small fragments of stone. For a moment, he thought his eyes were deceiving him. Beneath the layers of rock was something metallic, a dull golden glow reflecting the afternoon light. He called Clara over, yelling until she came running with her coffee still in hand. Together, they stared at the glimmering object lodged inside the boulder. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice trembling, "that looks like a box." The next few hours felt like minutes. With careful effort, Daniel chipped away until the shape was fully revealed, a rusted metal chest, sealed tight, its hinges corroded but intact. They exchanged glances, the air thick with anticipation. "This can't be real," Clara murmured. "How could a chest end up inside a rock?" By the time the sun began to set, Daniel had dragged the chest into his barn. He washed the dirt from its surface and examined the strange carvings etched along the sides, faint symbols he didn't recognize. His fingers traced over one in particular that resembled a tree with roots spreading down into a circle. "Maybe your father knew something about this," Clara suggested. Daniel shook his head. "He never mentioned it, but maybe he didn't want me to find it." As the night settled, Daniel lit a single lantern and reached for his old toolbox. With a rusted chisel, he pried open the chest. The hinges groaned, dust billowed out, and for a few seconds, all he could see was darkness inside. Then, as he leaned closer, something glimmered faintly. He pulled out a small wooden box, smooth and polished, despite the years. Inside it lay a bundle of letters tied with a red ribbon, and beneath them, a photograph. The photo was old, faded at the edges, showing a man who looked just like Daniel. Same jawline, same deep-set eyes, standing beside a woman under that very tree, long before it had grown through the rock. On the back, a message was scribbled, "For the one who chooses to listen." Daniel's hands trembled. "What in the world?" he whispered. He untied the ribbon and unfolded the first letter. The handwriting was elegant, unfamiliar. It began with, "To the future keeper of this land, if you are reading this, then the time has come for the truth, buried beneath your feet, to rise again." His heart raced as he read on. The letter spoke of a secret his ancestors had sworn to protect, something hidden under the roots of the tree, something that had once saved the town during a time of great despair. But the rest of the message was smudged, unreadable from age. Daniel sat there, stunned. The storm outside began to roll in, rain pelting the roof as the wind howled through the cracks in the barn. He looked at the photo again, then back at the chest. Clara, sensing his unease, put a hand on his shoulder. "Maybe you should leave it be for tonight," she said gently. Sometimes the past reveals itself when it's ready. But Daniel couldn't. He felt it deep down. This was more than an old family secret. There was a reason the tree had grown through that rock, a reason his father had warned him never to touch it. And as lightning flashed across the fields, illuminating the boulder outside, he made a silent vow. He would uncover the truth, no matter what it cost. The next morning, the air carried that damp, heavy scent that follows a long night of rain. Mist clung to the hills, and Daniel could still see steam rising from the wet soil. He barely slept, haunted by the words in that letter. When he walked out to the field, the boulder looked different, darker, almost breathing under the fog. The tree growing from it shimmered faintly in the early light, its bark slick with rainwater. It was as if nature itself was guarding something sacred. Clara showed up again, as she always did, uninvited, but welcome. "You look like you didn't get a wink of sleep," she said, handing him a cup of coffee. "Did you figure out what was in those letters?" Daniel shook his head, rubbing his temples. "Just fragments. They talk about a secret buried beneath the roots, something meant to protect the town." Clara arched an eyebrow. "Protect it from what?" He exhaled, staring at the boulder. "That's what I need to find out." The two decided to return to the chest together. Under the glow of a lantern, Daniel unfolded the remaining letters carefully. One was almost entirely destroyed, but a few words stood out: stone, promise, river, and forgiveness. Another letter mentioned a flood that nearly destroyed the town 100 years ago, and how the people had prayed for a miracle. The writer described a family, Daniel's ancestors, who made a sacred pact to guard something powerful. "A legend, maybe," Clara said, though her tone lacked conviction. "Or maybe just a story passed down to keep the kids away from the rock." But Daniel wasn't convinced. He had seen something inside that stone, something man-made. He began digging near the roots of the tree, the soil soft and rich from the rain. Hours passed as he worked silently, sweat mixing with mud on his skin. Just when he was about to stop, his shovel struck something hard. It wasn't rock. It sounded hollow. He dropped to his knees and cleared the dirt with his hand. There, half buried, was another small wooden panel, carved with the same symbol of a tree encircled by roots. "What in the world is this doing here?" Clara whispered, crouching beside him. Together they pried it loose, revealing an opening beneath the boulder, a narrow gap leading into darkness. The smell of damp earth and age rose from it, sharp and musty. Daniel fetched a flashlight and shone it inside. Stone steps descended beneath the rock, twisting into the unknown. "Clara," he said, his voice low, "there's a tunnel under my land." Against her better judgment, Clara followed him down. The walls were rough, lined with old roots that wound like veins through the stone. After several feet, they reached a small chamber, where the air felt strangely still. In the center stood a stone pedestal, and on it lay a sealed clay jar. Daniel approached carefully, brushing away centuries of dust. The jar was inscribed with more of those strange symbols, tree roots, circles, and what looked like waves of water. When he touched it, a chill ran through him. The clay felt warm, almost alive. Clara whispered, "Danny, maybe we shouldn't." But before she could finish, he lifted the lid. Inside, there wasn't gold or jewels, but a rolled parchment wrapped in silk. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a hand-drawn map of the valley. Their town, the hills, the river, everything. But something was different. The map showed a second river, one that didn't exist anymore, running straight through the fields where Daniel's farm now stood. Clara's eyes widened. "That flood, the one from the letter." Maybe this was before they changed the river's course. Daniel nodded. Or maybe this map shows how it used to be, before the land was altered. On the corner of the parchment, another message was scrawled in faded ink. When the stone cracks, the truth will flow again. Suddenly, a rumble echoed from above. The ground shook, dust falling from the ceiling. Clara gasped. "We need to go!" They scrambled up the steps, emerging into the daylight as the wind picked up and clouds gathered once more. Daniel turned to see the boulder trembling, small pieces breaking off as the tree's roots expanded through the cracks. It was like the earth itself was responding to what they'd uncovered. Then, with a thunderous sound, part of the rock collapsed, revealing a hollow core. Inside, glimmering faintly under the weak sunlight, was a pool of clear water bubbling up from beneath. Daniel froze, his mind racing. "It's a spring," he whispered. Clara stepped closer, awe in her voice. "Daniel, this is groundwater, maybe an ancient source sealed inside all these years." Word spread quickly. Within a day, half the town had gathered on Daniel's land, marveling at the miracle. The water was pure and cold, and soon people started saying it tasted sweeter than any they'd ever had. The local historian, Mr. Hawkins, examined the site and declared it was likely an old aquifer, blocked off during a shift in the land generations ago. "You might have just found the town's original water source," he said, patting Daniel on the back. But not everyone was celebrating. The mayor arrived with a team of officials, warning Daniel not to claim the spring without proper tests. It could belong to the town, one of them argued. Daniel didn't care. He wasn't thinking about ownership, only about the meaning behind what he'd found. That night he sat by the glowing pool, reading the letters again under the lantern's flickering light. The words about promise and forgiveness echoed in his mind. He realized the water was more than just a discovery. It was a reminder. His family had once promised to protect this land, and now, after years of struggle, it was giving something back. The next morning, he decided to share the water freely with everyone. "If this spring came from the earth beneath my feet," he said, "then it was never mine alone." Clara smiled, eyes misty. "Your father would be proud." Daniel nodded. "Maybe he's the one who led me here." If you've been following this story so far, take a second to subscribe and share what you think Daniel should do next. Should he let the town take control of the spring or guard it like his ancestors once did? Your thoughts might shape the next story. For a few days, the spring felt like a blessing that arrived precisely when the town needed something to believe in, and Daniel let himself enjoy that peace. Folks came with jars and tin cups, laughing like kids as the water cooled their tongues and calmed their nerves. But peace in a small town is a timid animal. It spooks easily. On the fifth morning, a pair of white trucks rolled up the dirt road, doors stamped with the logo of a regional water company. The first person out was Ethan Cole, mid-30s, crisp shirt, soft hands, a project manager type who smelled faintly of aftershave and ambition. He introduced himself with a smile that never touched his eyes and started tossing around words like resource, permit, and municipal interest. Daniel folded his arms and listened. Clara stood beside him, silent, the way a friend does when she knows you'll need both courage and calm. Ethan took a quick sample while his assistant snapped photos, then launched a tidy speech about partnerships. "We can help you do this the right way," he said. "Protect the site, cap the flow, test regularly, even build a visitor platform. Of course, we'd need access rights and a cooperative agreement. Everyone wins." Daniel stared past him at the boulder, now ragged with cracks, the little tree bristling green from its stubborn perch. "The water isn't a product," he said. "It's a promise my family made a long time ago." Ethan's smile thinned. "Promises are fine for bedtime. Towns run on budgets. I'll be at the council meeting tonight. Hope to see you there." That afternoon, Maya Thompson, a civil engineer in her early 30s who handled infrastructure for the county, drove over in a dusty SUV. Unlike Ethan, she walked the ground first, crouched by the spring, traced the fissures with her fingers, studied the slope, the soil, the way the grass bowed toward the channel like it remembered something. "You've got a live seam here," she said, "an old course waking up. If more rock gives, the flow could increase fast. Beautiful, but risky." Daniel explained the map he'd found and the letters that mentioned a flood and a pact. Maya frowned thoughtfully. If there was a deliberate diversion long ago, you might be sitting on the keystone of that work. Pull the wrong piece. The whole puzzle shifts. She looked him in the eye. If the truth really does flow again, as your note said, we'll need to shepherd it, not choke it. The council meeting was held in the school gym, the kind of echoing room where basketballs and opinions bounce too easily. The mayor took the podium, gravel in his voice, and a stack of papers at hand. "We're here to discuss water rights and safety," he began. Ethan spoke first, polished and brisk, painting a picture of carefully managed abundance, taps, meters, revenue, a neat ribbon of prosperity tied to a cap on a spring. Then Daniel stepped up. He wasn't polished. He was plain. He told the room about the boulder, the letters, the map with the second river, the way the ground trembled when the chest came out and the rocks split open. He talked about the taste of the water and the look on people's faces when they drank it. And he said, as simply as he knew how, that some things can't be sold without selling a piece of yourselves along with them. It could have gone either way then, but small towns are swayed by more than numbers. Noah Green, a high school custodian in his 40s with a gentle voice, stood up and said the spring had eased his daughter's migraines when nothing else had. Maybe it was luck, maybe it was placebo, but it felt like mercy. Irene Walker, who ran the diner, admitted the free water shaved costs just enough to keep her from letting a part-time waitress go. Mr. Hawkins, the historian, shuffled forward with a brittle ledger from the library archive and read aloud an entry from 97 years ago. A volunteer brigade stacking stone through a moonlit week to divert a river that threatened to swallow the town whole. "The Miller men led it," Hawkins said. "They promised to keep vigil over the seal until the land forgot the path." A murmur moved through the gym like wind through wheat. The mayor rubbed his brow. "We have obligations," he said, nodding toward Ethan without naming him, "but we also have roots." He proposed a temporary resolution: independent testing for potability, a safety perimeter, and a public stewardship committee to recommend long-term management. Ethan smiled like a chess player conceding a pawn to set up a later gambit. "Of course," he said smoothly. "We all want what's best." Back at the farm, night pressed against the windows, while Daniel, Clara, and Maya spread the map on the kitchen table. The parchment showed not just a second river, but faint dotted lines that looped beneath Daniel's fields like the ribs of some buried creature. Maya traced them with a pencil. "Underground channels," she guessed. "Karst-like features or old cutoffs. If pressure builds, fissures may open where the land remembers the way to run." Clara tapped a symbol near the boulder, the tree etched in a ring. "Guardian mark," she murmured. "Your family's sign for hold." Daniel fetched the letters again. One scrap he'd barely noticed earlier seemed clearer now in the lamplight. A sentence about stones, fitted by hands and by time, and a note that the heart rock should never be broken unless truth is chosen over fear. "What's the heart rock?" Daniel asked. Hawkins, who had joined them after the meeting with a thermos of black tea, peered through his bifocals. "Central locking stone. Ancient builders used them to hold arches. In rivers, a single keystone could nudge a current. Tuck it away like a folded sheet." Maya nodded. "If that heart rock beneath the boulder is fractured, the seam will keep opening. Not necessarily catastrophic, but definite change. Water doesn't argue, it insists." Change began the next morning. A faint trickle etched a new lace across the pasture. When Daniel stepped on the grass, he could feel a hush below. The way sound gets swallowed in a cathedral, the earth's attention pulled inward. He followed the trickle to the fence line, where Tessa Reed, a local reporter in her late 20s with a quick pen and quicker wit, was photographing dragonflies stitching patterns above the water. "People are reading," she said with a grin that carried both warning and luck. "Some are calling this a miracle. Some are calling it opportunity. You know what comes next, right?" He did. The town would divide its hope along familiar seams: faith and fear, need and greed. By noon, the water company trucks returned, this time with a lawyer in a Navy suit and a polite letterhead. They wanted access for surveillance and preliminary cap modeling. The mayor stalled them, but a clock had started. Everyone could hear it. Maya and Daniel took shovels and marked a modest channel to guide overflow toward an old drainage ditch that jogged safely toward fallow land. They worked without fuss, following the map's intuition more than its lines, because maps are clever but memory is wiser. As they dug, Daniel's spade rang against something not quite stone. He knelt and cleared the soil by hand. There lay a carved slab, smaller than the first panel, stamped with the same tree-in-circle seal and an engraving, 3 short lines like water ripples and a single dot above them, as if someone had drawn a tear refusing to fall. He pried it up. Beneath was a narrow cavity perfectly fitted to the slab like a lid for a mouth. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, sat another note and a tiny iron key the size of his thumb. The note's ink had bled but not vanished. "When the time comes, choose together," it read. "Turn the lock with mercy, not pride, for the river remembers every hand." Maya held the key, weighing this strange inheritance. "A lock," she said softly. "So there's a mechanism somewhere, something made to either release or restrain." Clara's eyes flicked to the boulder. Maybe the Heart Rock isn't just a legend. That evening, the stewardship committee gathered at the farm. The mayor, Maya, Hawkins, Irene from the diner, Noah, Tessa with her recorder off for once, and Pastor James, a 50-year-old with kind eyes who preferred solving problems over preaching about them. They formed a rough circle near the spring while twilight laid lavender on the fields. Daniel showed them the key and the note. No one spoke for a moment. All you could hear was the water's quiet syllables and the steady chorus of crickets, the old language of a land that keeps living no matter what people decide. Pastor James broke the silence. "If there's a lock, there was a choice then," he said. "And there's a choice now. Not fear, not pride, mercy." "Mercy for who?" Irene answered first. "For families who can't afford rising water bills," Noah added. "For the hillside houses that flood when ditches back up." Maya pointed toward the ditch they'd cut. "For the soil itself, so it doesn't rush and erode." Hawkins, voice papery, said, "And mercy for memory, for the ones who built in secret so we could wake up dry." They went back underground with headlamps and caution, descending the tight steps into the chamber beneath the boulder. The air felt thicker than before, like something that had slept a century was yawning itself awake. Daniel noticed a seam along the pedestal he'd missed the first time. On its side, half hidden by dust and root hairs, a tiny iron plate waited with a keyhole no bigger than a pea. His hand shook as he fit the key. He didn't turn it. Not yet. He looked around the circle and found every face, one by one. "Together," he said, and they nodded. When the key turned, it did not swing loud or dramatic. It clicked like a whisper choosing to be heard. Somewhere deep beneath their feet, a muffled slide responded, followed by a soft, continuous sound like fabric being drawn across stone. The pedestal shifted a hair. Water answered, not with a rush, but with a recommitment, a fuller breath pulling through the fissures. Above them, the land answered too, a light, even tremor, then a settling sigh. They climbed back to the dusk where the spring held a rounder mirror of the dim sky. The flow had grown, but not wildly. It braided with the small channel they'd carved and moved on with patient purpose. The boulder, relieved of some burden, looked less like a wound and more like a door that had finally learned to stay open without breaking its frame. Ethan's trucks were long gone for the day, for now the town had decided, and the land had agreed. "Not victory," Maya said, eyeing the run, "but harmony for the moment." "Harmony sounds like victory to me," Clara replied, smiling at Daniel the way you smile when you witness a man remember who he is. In the days that followed, the story spread far beyond the hills. A local news station aired a short feature titled "The Tree That Split Stone and Set Water Free," and within a week, curious visitors began to arrive. Families, hikers, even a few journalists from the city. They took photos of the boulder and filled bottles with spring water, calling it blessed. Some townspeople worried the peace would vanish under camera flashes, but Daniel kept calm. "Let them see what patience looks like," he said. "Maybe they'll take some home." The stewardship committee set up signs asking visitors to tread lightly, to take no more than a jar, to leave no trash. Maya installed a small sensor to monitor flow and quality, while Clara, always practical, brought benches from her backyard so the elderly could sit and listen to the water's quiet hymn. Pastor James began holding evening reflections there. Not services exactly, but gentle talks about gratitude, about the stubborn mercy of the earth. The place became a living parable, a reminder that not every treasure glitters and not every crack means ruin, but even peace can stir envy. One morning, Daniel found tire tracks cutting through his fence. A pump had been lowered into the stream overnight, plastic tubing leading toward the road. He yanked it free and followed the line, discovering it ended in an abandoned shed behind the mill. Inside, a small generator sat humming, collecting water into barrels. A crumpled invoice with Ethan Cole's company logo lay on the floor. Daniel's jaw tightened. He carried the generator outside and smashed it with his shovel until it coughed its last puff of smoke. Then he drove to town. At the mayor's office, the air felt charged. Ethan stood there already, feigning outrage. He destroyed private property, he told the mayor. We had a testing permit. Daniel threw the torn invoice onto the desk. You had greed, not permission, he said evenly. This isn't about tests, it's about control. The mayor's gaze shifted from one to the other, heavy with exhaustion. Enough, he said. We'll investigate, but I won't let this turn neighbor against neighbor. Ethan, your team steps back until the committee finishes its assessment. Ethan's lips pressed thin, but he nodded. As he left, he leaned close to Daniel. You can't stop progress forever, he murmured. Daniel answered quietly, then I'll settle for long enough. That night, under a harvest moon, Daniel returned to the Boulder alone. The field shimmered silver, and the little tree's leaves whispered like secrets between old friends. He knelt beside the water, cupped a handful, and drank. It was cold and bright, as if drawn from another time. He thought of his father, how the old man used to rest here at sunset, hat over his face, murmuring prayers Daniel never bothered to learn. Now those words pressed on the edge of memory, ghost syllables asking to be spoken. He whispered the only ones he could recall. Guard the flow, forgive the hand. The water lapped once, gentle as breath. In the following weeks, something subtle began to change in Daniel. The burden that had hung on his shoulders for years, the loneliness, the fatigue, the quiet resentment of fate, began to ease. Working the fields felt lighter. He started inviting volunteers to help maintain the area around the spring, especially the teenagers who'd once called his land cursed. They built a wooden fence and laid flat stones for a path. Clara organized small gatherings where townsfolk shared family stories, legends, recipes, half-forgotten songs. Every place needs memory, she said, else it forgets how to be home. Maya noticed another shift. The land itself seemed to breathe easier. Soil near the spring grew richer, crops nearby stronger. The cows from the next farm preferred drinking from the flow, and birds nested close to the boulder as if drawn by invisible warmth. Scientists might have explained it through minerals or pressure or magnetic fields, but the people didn't bother dissecting miracle. They simply called it the gift that came when a promise was kept. Then, one stormy afternoon, a loud crack echoed across the valley. Daniel ran outside, fearing the worst. Lightning had struck the tree that grew from the rock, splitting its trunk clean down the middle. He rushed through the rain, heart hammering, but found that instead of burning, the tree stood glowing faintly, sap glistening like amber. The lightning had carved a hollow down its core, revealing rings that seemed to pulse with soft light. The storm raged for an hour, but the boulder didn't budge. When the rain ceased, the spring flowed stronger than before, sparkling under the broken tree. By dawn, word had spread again. The townspeople gathered in silence, marveling. Clara touched the scarred trunk, eyes wide. Maybe the tree had to open too, she whispered. Pastor James nodded. Sometimes even blessings need breaking to breathe. Daniel said nothing, but deep inside he knew this was the final sign. The land had completed its cycle, sealing the promise not with gold or stone, but with renewal. That evening, while others went home, Daniel stayed behind with Maya. They sat on the damp grass watching fireflies float like embers above the water. She turned to him. You ever think your father knew all this would happen? He smiled faintly. Maybe not the details, but he trusted the soil. That's close enough. She studied his face for a long moment. You're different now, she said. Lighter. He laughed softly. Maybe the rock wasn't the only thing that cracked. The next morning, Daniel hung a wooden sign on the fence, hand-carved and simple. The Promised Spring, free for all who respect the land. Underneath, he added a smaller plaque. Guard the flow, forgive the hand. People stopped to read, some smiling, some thoughtful. Tessa, the reporter, wrote one last article titled The Farmer Who Freed the River, ending it with a line that resonated across every porch and kitchen table. In a world that keeps damning what it doesn't understand, one man remembered to listen when the earth whispered back. Soon after, letters began arriving, handwritten notes from strangers who'd seen the broadcast. Some thanked Daniel for reminding them that patience still mattered. Others shared their own small miracles. An orchard revived after years of drought, a lost well rediscovered. Daniel kept them in the old chest he'd found inside the rock, right beside the ancient letters. New promises, he said when Clara asked. Every one of them. Yet not everything was serene. Bureaucrats still sent forms, and Ethan's company tried again through legal channels. But the mayor, now firmly on the side of the people, declared the site protected by heritage law. It couldn't be privatized. Ethan eventually left town, defeated not by argument, but by the quiet unity of neighbors who refused to sell their story. When his trucks disappeared down the highway, Daniel stood by the fence, tipping his hat to the fading dust. Good riddance, Clara said. Progress finds better roads. He grinned. Or maybe it just needed a map drawn by mercy. As autumn arrived, gold brushed the hills and the fields glowed like coins under the sun. Children played near the fence, their laughter blending with the ripple of water. The town, once half forgotten, began to thrive again. Modestly, honestly. The diner stayed open late. The school got new books from donations inspired by the story. And a craftsman began carving little stone trees as keepsakes for visitors. Daniel sold none of them himself. The spring gave freely, he said. So should we. When night fell, he often sat by the boulder, now smooth where lightning had split it, running his fingers along its cool surface. Sometimes he'd feel a vibration, almost like a heartbeat. Maybe it was just the water beneath. Maybe it was memory alive. Either way, it was enough. If you're feeling the pull of this story, hit subscribe and tell us what part touched you the most. Was it the promise, the storm, or the choice Daniel made to protect the land? Share your thoughts. Your voice might water the roots of the next story. Winter crept in softly, not with blizzards or bravado, but with a hush that tucked the valley beneath a shawl of frost. Mornings came pearl gray, the kind of light that made breath look like smoke and footsteps sound like folded paper. The spring did not slow. It wore a little crown of mist at dawn, steady as a heartbeat. Daniel learned its music by memory, how it brightened after a rain, how it deepened at midnight, how it softened when snow threatened. People still came, fewer now, the kind of visitors who walk quietly and keep their wonder tucked close. They left notes on the fence and little ribbons on the broken tree, not to claim but to thank, like pilgrims who finally learned that gratitude travels lighter than judgment. One such morning, Maya arrived with blueprints rolled under her arm and a thermos of cinnamon coffee. She'd been studying the map's dotted channels, overlaying them with modern surveys, listening for where old geology hummed beneath paved assumptions. I think your land is speaking in chords, she said, spreading the papers on the tailgate of Daniel's truck. Not one note, not a single vein. The spring is the melody, but there are harmonics, slow seepage under the north field, a faint rise near the sycamores, all part of the same song. Daniel smiled. Then we don't force it to sing louder. We make room for the harmony. She nodded. Exactly. I'm proposing terraces here and here, a wet meadow along the old ditch, and a small stone weir to slow the flow in spring. Nothing artificial, a frame for what wants to be. Clara joined, scarf knotted high on her neck, cheeks pink from the cold. She carried a basket of honey biscuits and news from town. Irene's diner now offered a promise blend of herbal tea. Noah organized after-school trail cleanups. and Pastor James had started a quiet tradition. On the longest night of the year, families gathered by the boulder to light candles and tell a story they hadn't told in years. "It's making us remember each other," Clara said, her eyes crinkling. "Not just the water, the we." Hawkins shuffled up later, a wool cap pulled low, cradling a book he'd finally translated from a forgotten shelf. "It's a field log," he said, tapping the cover. "Written by Owen Miller, your great-grandfather's brother. He describes the night they set the Heart Rock, how they argued whether to bury a warning or a welcome." He smiled, thin and true. "They chose welcome, but hid it where only patience would find it." Together they walked to the boulder, breath pluming, boots crunching. The lightning-split tree had hardened to a dark honey shell, the scar a clean seam that caught and held light. Daniel knelt by the base, where the roots gripped stone like a handshake that meant to last. There, tucked in a weathered niche he'd never noticed, lay a small tin capsule, the kind tinsmiths once used for tobacco, but grandmothers used for buttons and promises. He eased it free and pried the lid with a pocket knife. Inside were three things: a tiny brass compass, a square of linen embroidered with the tree encircle, and a folded slip of paper no bigger than a matchbox. He unfolded it carefully. The ink had thinned but still spoke. "If you come this far, you've learned it. Strength is not the stone, but the root. Wealth is not the water, but the way." Beneath it, a single line in a hand he recognized from the letters: "Guard the flow, forgive the hand." Daniel closed his eyes, and a quiet knot in his chest finally untied. He turned the note over. There was one more sentence, faint as if reluctant to live. "Forgive us, too, for sealing the river that wanted to run, for choosing fear when we were tired." The admission struck him with a tenderness more honest than triumph. It wasn't a myth of flawless ancestors. It was a record of flawed people doing the best they could with what they had, and trusting their children to do better when the land asked. He looked up to find Clara and Maya watching, not intruding, understanding that some revelations are shared by being witnessed, not explained. "They were afraid," Daniel said softly. "They saved the town by closing what they loved, and they hoped we'd open it without drowning in pride." Maya slipped her hand into her coat pocket. "Then we honor them by staying humble and adjusting as we learn. No monuments, just maintenance." The stewardship committee met that week in the barn, huddled around a potbelly stove that clicked and sighed like an old friend. Tessa recorded only after everyone agreed. The story had taught her that some truths need to breathe before they're broadcast. Plans took shape not as decrees, but as invitations. Volunteer days to build the terrace contours, a school project measuring turbidity with borrowed lab kits, Pastor James coordinating story circles, where newcomers listened more than they spoke. Irene promised hot soup for every shovel crew. Noah offered ladders and a pickup. Even the mayor rolled up his sleeves. "I can sign papers or haul gravel," he said, "and I'd rather haul gravel." Only one face was missing. Ethan had left weeks earlier, but absence has a way of leaving fingerprints. A certified letter arrived from his company proposing mediation, then a second letter rescinding it with a terse line about insufficient commercial interest. The town chuckled, relieved, the way people laugh when thunder passes and the rain finally settles into something you can sleep to. Daniel read the letters once and put them in the chest, not as trophies, but as reminders of a fight they'd won by choosing not to fight the wrong thing. Pride was the real opponent. They had let the land referee. On the longest night, the town gathered by the boulder, as Pastor James had hoped, candles cupped against the hush. The spring reflected small flames like a constellation that had bent low to study itself. Children sat cross-legged on blankets, noses pink, eyes wide. Hawkins read from the field log, then closed it and spoke without paper. "In every age, we get to decide if we will damn our fear or our neighbors," he said. "One of those choices makes us poor, no matter how rich we look." Clara told a story about her father learning to listen for rain by the smell of the wind. Maya explained, in words any child could grasp, how water carries memory, minerals like syllables, flows like sentences, and how engineering can be a way of practicing mercy. Irene passed bread, Noah poured cocoa. Tessa kept her camera in her bag, and let the scene imprint on her instead. When it was Daniel's turn, he didn't give a speech. He held up the little compass from the capsule. "It doesn't point to gold," he said. "It points home." The rest of winter stitched itself into a rhythm. Terraces took shape under careful hands. The wet meadow welcomed red-winged blackbirds in late February, early for their kind, as if gossip had reached them that this patch of land remembered how to feed more than roots. The weir stones settled in with a craftsman's patience, each rock chosen for the way it accepted its place. The spring learned the new path quickly. Water is the fastest learner alive when you offer it honesty, and the channel traced a silver ribbon through the meadow, like handwriting that practices itself until it becomes legible to everyone. There were challenges, of course. A sudden thaw swelled the flow, nibbling at the edge of a terrace that wasn't tamped enough. Volunteers fixed it before lunch. A dog walker ignored signs and slipped in the shallows. Clara scolded kindly and sent him home with dry socks and a story. A rumor surfaced that bottles labeled Promise Spring were selling online. Tessa tracked down the reseller and wrote a piece so clear-eyed and fair that he apologized publicly and stopped. Each problem became a small apprenticeship in community. How to correct without shaming, how to guard without hoarding, how to keep the story larger than any single person. And then one morning in early spring, nearly a year since the first crack, the tree sprouted a spray of delicate leaves from the seam lightning had opened. They were thin and brave, the color of new hope. Children squealed and reached through the fence to touch them with 2 fingers, the way you greet a shy animal. Daniel stood with Maya and Clara, watching these small green pennants declare what the entire valley already knew. Breaking had not ended the tree. It had let it breathe out what it had been saving. Daniel cleared his throat. "You ever think about how long it took for this?" he asked. "How many decades of quiet work under stone before a single leaf could decide the time was right?" Maya slid her hands into her jacket, smiling. "Longer than a grant cycle, less than a lifetime. Exactly as long as it needed." When the first warm evening finally arrived, the town held a simple potluck by the fence. Casseroles in dented pans, laughter in easy measure, music from a single guitar against the twilight. Pastor James said a few words, but mostly people just looked at the water and each other and let the silence carry more than sermons could. Daniel wandered to the boulder and rested his palm on the old, cool face, feeling again the slow vibration he'd come to trust. He whispered the words he had learned to love, not as law, but as lullaby. Guard the flow, forgive the hand. The spring answered with its soft, steady assent. Later, after the tables were cleared and the last jar filled, Daniel walked the path alone. Stars leaned close, the meadow breathed. He thought of the letters, the compass, the key, the committee, the meddling and the mercy, the way a town had been stunned, not by spectacle, but by a decision to listen. He felt gratitude rise, not showy, not loud, just honest. He turned toward the farmhouse light, paused and looked back once more. The leaves on the split tree trembled and stilled, as if nodding good night. He smiled. "I hear you," he said to the land. "I'm listening." And because listening, once learned, keeps teaching, he made a quiet promise he knew he could keep, that as seasons turned and people came and went, as children grew tall and maps grew old, he would tend not only the spring, but the stories that flowed from it, stories that could remind a hurried world that yes, stone can crack, but what lasts is the root. Yes, water can be bottled, but what saves us is the way it moves through us when we share it. And yes, a single farmer can change a town, but only by choosing to belong to it first. If this story moved you, I'd love to have you with us. Subscribe to the channel, share your own stories of places that healed when people listened, and tell us in the comments, what did you learn from Daniel's choice and the town's response?